Hey, it's Zehnder, and I want to thank you so much for listening to the Red Letter Disciple. We are coming up on the end. It's the final episode of 2025, and thank you so much to our loyal listeners. We want to use this podcast platform to create greater disciples, and we'd love to know how we can best do that in your life. And so thank you for tuning in, for being a loyal listener, for sharing, for commenting, for following, for subscribing, for all the things. It really helps us in the future in 2026 to create even more episodes. But it's the final of the year, and I'm excited to bring Matt Popovits, a friend of mine, onto the podcast. Not long ago, both Matt and I produced videos expressing our displeasure with what we feel like is a move in our synod that is backwards to raise the age of the specific ministry program to 40 years old or higher. And so I asked Matt what prompted him to add his voice into this pivotal conversation that, let's be real, we need to continue to forward. And so Matt talks about that in the future of the Synod, and just love his voice in on this. And if you want to get more, your voice to be more included in, I want to invite you to come to Las Vegas, January 7 and 8. It's late notice, but you can still maybe get there as we join in the Koinonia gathering. I'll put the link in the show notes or in the description as we join together to talk pastoral formation in 2026. These conversations aren't going away. It's time we have more of them, and I'm grateful for Matt lending his voice. Today's episode is brought to you by Giving Challenge. It's our latest 40-day challenge. We just launched it a few months ago. The first wave of about 20 churches went through it and saw incredible results. This can be a beautiful resource for you to grow your offerings or tithes. It can be a resource to use in your capital campaign. We even partnered with Elevate Group, a capital campaign expert group, and that they not only endorsed the product, but wrote up a 24-page alignment guide for how you can use a series like this in your capital campaign. We really have all the resources you need for a turnkey 40-day experience. And so if you want to not only produce great disciples, but grow the funds to match your church's vision or even exceed your church's vision, to be thinking about new things, this is the series for you. Go to redlettergiving.com. Go to redlettergiving.com. You can find out more about Giving Challenge there. And it's an awesome time in New Year or Lent to launch a 40-day challenge. So let's do that together. But first, let's get to today's episode with Matt Popovits. Let's do this. Well, we got a great episode today with Matt Popovits. And so, Matt, it's great to have you on the Red Letter Disciple. How is your day going today?
It's going great. It's even better now that I get to chat with you.
I don't know about that. We'll see at the end of that. But tell me, man, there's a lot going on in our church body right now, and want to steer some conversations to ultimately care for our church body and the people, the disciples that we're raising up. And so I want to get into some of those issues today, especially you've been vocal lately. I have as well on the SMP pastor program, and some of the new policy and age requirement limits and things like that. So we're going to get to that in just a moment. But first, I just kind of love to hear you, man. Tell me about your faith and your history, particularly in our church body. Have you always grown up LCMS? Are you a system guy? Or give me a little bit there.
I proudly grew up LCMS, just outside of Flint, Michigan, at Holy Cross Lutheran Church in Flushing. Had a wonderful pastor there, and my faith was really formed there. I was baptized in the Roman Catholic Church at about a month old, but then raised in my local Lutheran church. So I'm a lifelong Lutheran. However, I'm not, when it comes to entering into the ministry, I'm not a system guy. So never attended a Lutheran day school, didn't attend or graduate from a Concordia. But in fact, I'm a public school kid, and then graduated from the Department of Theater and Dance at the University of Michigan, of all things, and thought I was going to go into that world until I started working at my local church. My pastor took me under his wing and discipled me personally, and gave me opportunity to work at the church and lead at the church. And it was really there through my invitation to lead in the local church that my imagination for pastoral ministry was really sparked and formed. And I had a lot of people saying, you should really consider this. And so graduated from University of Michigan with a theater degree, of all things, but then headed to Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. And that was really the start of my Lutheran education, and my pastoral formation was right there in St. Louis. And so I had a lot of catching up to do. But thankfully I was able to catch up, and now I've been able to serve the Lord's church in the LCMS as a pastor for 20 years. This is my 20th year of pastoral ministry.
Wow, that's great. So you graduated then, it's from seminary '05, is that correct?
Yeah. Yep. Left in '05. I did a deferred vicarage because I was on a church planting track at that time, and but graduated in '06.
Cool. That's awesome, bro. I love that. And I think some may or may not know this, but you and I have also been pretty involved in the National Youth Gathering.
That's right.
For our synod. You've been a host of it, as have I. And what most people don't know is that in 2022 in Houston, Noemi and I were co-hosting. You were there in the background every day, offering guidance, assistance, coaching, and that's where, honestly, I think your theater, like, I could really tell, like, this dude gets it, and you really taught me a lot of things about stage presence and using that moment. And I told you before that in those days, which are pretty interesting and unlike any probably that I've had in my life. You were a real calming presence, and so I just want to thank you for that. You served in a way that is very public, being on the main stage, and you've served behind the scenes. But tell us why you've been a part of the youth gathering, and putting some time and effort and energy into that.
Well, thank you for those kind words. It was really my pleasure. It's something I'm really passionate about is effective gospel communication, and then not only embodying that myself whenever given the opportunity, of course, in pastoral ministry, and beyond, but in supporting gospel communicators and helping them develop and helping them feel confident is something I'm really passionate about. In fact, I have another ministry that we started called Make It Simple, and a big part of its mission is to do that, is to come alongside people who have the most important message in the world and equip them for effective communication. But my history with youth gathering started when I was a high school student, and it changed my life. And I think that story is told by thousands, tens of thousands of people in our synod who went to that youth gathering, and it was a life-changing experience for them. And that's certainly the case for me. I remember I attended in 97 or 98 in San Antonio. The theme was River of Light, and my DCE took me there. We got in line really early to go sit in the front row down on the main floor. And we were sitting there, and I was just in awe that our church body was putting this on and telling these amazing stories through theater, with the dramas, but then also the gospel proclamation was just incredible. And I remember my DCE sitting there, and she leaned over to me and she looked at the guy who was his role was the dream weaver, Terry Dittmer, and she leaned over to me and she said, "You're going to do that someday." And I was 17, 18 years old. And she's like, "You're going to do that someday." And she kind of spoke that vision into my life of being a gospel communicator in our church body. And I was like, "Oh, really? Whatever." And then I find myself in 2010 for the very first time standing on the National Youth Gathering stage as a presenter, and then again in 2016 as one of the hosts. And her vision came to life. Her name is Shar Kleinedler. She's now sainted in glory, but she planted that vision. And so I got to speak in 2010 on the main stage in New Orleans, and then in 2016 served as a host, and have been trying to serve and support the youth gathering in a lot of ways ever since.
That's amazing, and I love that. Something that someone from an older generation said to you at those pivotal years. It's so important that we pour into our young people this way. And you were in Finland not long ago. Was that related to what are you doing in Finland? Is that related to the youth stuff?
It's adjacent to work that I've done with Youth Gathering in the past, because I got connected to the group that puts on what's called the Matanakavisa Festival through.
Say that again. The what? The
Matanakavisa.
I'm sure the captions will crush that one.
I'm sure they will. Yeah. So there is there's a group in Finland that is part of the confessional Lutheran holdouts in the Church of Finland, the Lutheran Church of Finland, which is, I think to say nicely, a bit of a mess. But there's a group, a confessional group of pastors there that do a lot of work in youth ministry there, and they're holding tight to the true Christian faith as it's taught in the Lutheran church body. And one of the things that they do is they put on this, for the last 40 years, this this music festival, this youth festival. It's one of the largest Christian festivals in all of Europe. And they put it on in Turku, Finland. And each year they invite someone, typically from the LCMS, to come and kind of share the gospel in the middle of this music festival. This last time it was 14,000 students. So I got connected to that because they came, the leaders of this conference came to the National Youth Gathering many years ago, saw me leading on the main stage, reached out to me, and we struck up a friendship. And so I've now presented at their festival 5 times over the last 10 years or so. And it's really a beautiful thing that they're doing over there. They're seeing a resurgence of interest in the Christian faith among young people in Finland, and that's shown in this last festival where they saw an increase in attendance. And so, yeah, I was there with 14,000 students getting to talk about Jesus. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah, can't beat that. That's incredible. All right, before we talk SMP stuff, I think one of the things I love about our God is that nothing is wasted. And so while the path for you wasn't, private school and Lutheran University, pre-seminary, seminary, you went the theater route. So I want to know from a preacher side of things, or even a pastor side of things, what 2 or 3 things did you learn from the theater world that not only you're bringing forward into your ministry, but you feel like might be good for any of us to hear?
Well, I think from a communication standpoint, that, typically when we're trained for communication, for preaching as pastors, we think almost exclusively about the theology of preaching, about rightly exegeting the text and our hermeneutic philosophy. And of course, that's of extreme importance, because if you don't get that right, then whatever you're preaching doesn't matter, right? Law, gospel distinctions of utmost importance. But one of the things we fail to teach communicators, gospel communicators, preachers, is about the pragmatics of just excellent communication. The kind of some of the unwritten rules of rhetoric, and how you can gain a hearing in the ears and hearts and minds of your audience, and how things like the tone of your voice, the tempo of your speech, the posture of your body, the pacing with which you speak makes a world of difference in how you're understood. And so I always encourage preachers to pay attention to those details. What's the emotion behind what you're trying to communicate? Can you articulate that? And how should that be embodied in a moment of real robust preaching of the law, or of joyful declaration of the finished work of Jesus Christ? How should that not only be rightly communicated in your theology, the words on your paper, but how can that also be rightly embodied physically? What should that look like? What should that sound like? And we often in our circles want to avoid such things because it feels maybe performative or fake, and that's just not true. These pragmatic pieces of communication really, really matter in how you're heard and understood. And so I just encourage preachers to think through the embodied reality of preaching, the physical reality of it, and what it means to communicate this, not just with my right theology, but with tone of voice, posture, what my face is doing, what my body is doing. Those things matter too. And so I just encourage you to pay attention to those things. And then the other thing I learned from the world of theater is that communication is all about collaboration. Even if you're the only person who is got the microphone or in the middle of the stage at any particular moment, it takes a team of people working together, trusting each other, being vulnerable with each other to make that moment of profound communication and connection happen. And that's the thing I love the most about the theater, is not the performing or the moment of communicating. It's the creative journey that you take together in the run up to that. It's doing it with other people. It's ideating and creating and squashing bad ideas and then ultimately working together to make that moment happen. Whether it's a Sunday service, whether it's the divine service and you're working together with the team, risking together to go out there and give God's gifts to the world, or it's a play, it's a performance, it's a musical. I love the collaborative aspect of it. And so I encourage pastors to not see themselves as an island as they prepare for Sundays. to work collaboratively, even if they're a sole pastor, work collaboratively with the laity, with the musicians, with everyone who's going to, the altar guild, everyone who's going to be involved, to enjoy the community that has to come together to make worship happen. Because that's the best part of it, the relationships, but also when you lean into those relationships, the power of that moment you're creating is amplified.
That's awesome. Can I ask you practically, like, what does that look like for you on those two aspects? Like, how, like, obviously you're writing a sermon, but then, like, what are you practically doing to make sure that tone or body language or, the things that you want to come across? So what are you practically doing there? And then how are you also then collaborating? What does that look like in your context?
Yeah. So when it comes to creating a sermon, writing a sermon, of course, I start with the theological work, start with the text, work the original languages, understand what the text is saying, what God is saying through the text. But then when it comes to writing the actual sermon, I'm always working a question of what emotion am I trying to communicate, or what feeling am I trying to the best of my ability, knowing that this is ultimately all up to the Holy Spirit, to the best of my ability, stir in the hearts of my hearer, right?
Yeah.
Just start there. What emotion should I be feeling and expressing as I say this? Because all of our communication is tied to emotion. All of it. All genuine human communication is tied to emotion. So what's the emotion I should be feeling and embodying in this? And what am I hoping to stir in the hearts of my hearer? Answer that question. When you look at that really important moment of just pure, gospel declaration, right? What am I feeling? What do I want them to feel? Articulate that. And then ask yourself this question as you're writing or as you're rehearsing, and you should always rehearse your preaching. Don't let the first service on Sunday be the first time you actually preach this thing. That is not faithful. As you're writing, or especially as you're rehearsing, ask yourself this question: if this is what I'm feeling and this is what I want them to experience, what should that look like? It's like, because a lot of preachers will be like, well, I'm trying to communicate joy, and I'm like, well, you should tell your face, man.
Right.
Tell your face. You're like, Christ has died for you, and all your sins are forgiven. Wow. It looks like you just showed up to my house to tell me that someone has died. Not that my sins are forgiven. So tell your face. What should this look like? What should this look like? And so if it's joyful, what does joy look like for you? Communicate that. So just ask yourself those questions. That's what that looks like. And then when it comes to the collaborative piece, I have been in large team ministries. I've been the senior pastor of a really large church. I've been the senior pastor of a medium-sized church, and I've been the sole pastor and the only employee of a church in a church plant. But whether I'm leading a team ministry or I'm the only guy on the team, I always, in the planning for Sunday, pull people around me and try to make it a collaborative experience. And so as we get ready for Sunday, I'm always trying to form and work with the team. And so when we work through the liturgy, even if it's the same liturgy we're doing each week, I try to gather a group of people and say, how does this need to look the same this week? How does it need to look different this week? What do we need our people to experience, in particular this week, given what's going on in the world? I just try to gather people around me and ask questions about the service that we're preparing for, whether it be the organist, my head elder, a member of the altar guild, or an associate pastor, a worship arts director. Just gather around a table and have a conversation together about what it is we're trying to accomplish. And even just doing that, have a planning meeting on a weekly basis to talk about this all-important moment of worship is essential to leaning into the community and getting the most out of it for you personally, but then maximizing the power of a team coming together to make that worship event happen.
That's good. Yeah, I love that, and we try to do that too here at King of Kings and it's different. It's different in different contexts. We have several pastors on our team, and so we have that weekly rhythm. Not only ahead of time, but also after, to kind of what landed, what didn't land, so that we kind of know for future. Two other quick questions on that. Yeah, how many rehearsals are you doing before you preach it on a Sunday morning?
Great question. So for me, I have a very strict rule that when it comes to my sermon on Sunday, I will read through it out loud 5 times. So I have a manuscript. I preach without notes, but I write a manuscript, and I read through it, moving around, because I'm a kind of a kinesthetic memorizer. So like I have to be moving, because ultimately I'm going to be preaching it moving. So I will walk around my office. I look like a crazy man. I walk around my office with my manuscript. I read it out loud 5 times, and then I set it aside. And on that 6th time, I will recite it, preach it out loud for the first time. And then, and that's when I really discover, like, oh, I don't really know this section very well, or I've got this other section down, or I don't really like the way this particular section feels. It doesn't feel right, doesn't feel authentic. Let me focus in on that a little bit. So I get to the church really early on Sunday mornings, and I'm usually here by 5 a.m. and I take the time to really work that sermon. So read it 5 times out loud, and then recite it, preach it without my notes, or as close to whatever preaching looks like for you, whether it's with some notes in front of you or not. Preach it one other time, and then I feel like I'm ready to go out and present it for the first time.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, you're a couple more than I am. I'm usually like a 4, and then I'll bring it on the 5th. But the other question on this is AI, because I've been using AI obviously after writing a sermon to kind of help me fine tune some things even before I bring it to the team. But one of the other things I've been using it for, I'm curious if you use it or if it's an effective use, is just kind of asking, like, here's my I also write out manuscripts. So, being able to plug that into a chat GPT or whatever platform you might use and say, hey, here's the transcript. What is the audience going to be feeling as I'm going through this? And what are 3 key body language or tone emotions, throughout the sermon that would be really important for me to hit? I've found that to be extremely helpful. And even the other week when I had a particularly law-heavy message on greed, something we don't talk about a lot in the church, of this sin. Nobody's ever confessed greed to me in a counseling session, but yet I think we're all greedy. And so I really wanted to, we're going to spend some time looking through the history of greed. And I was able to put it into Chat GPT, and they were able to tell me how people were going to feel, that it was going to be hard. But I was able to, after reading that at the front, say, hey, I'm going to go for a while, and you're probably going to start to feel pretty uncomfortable. And the moment when you're feeling uncomfortable, and maybe even too uncomfortable, there will be good news. And spoiler alert, it will be Jesus and his forgiveness. But I just want you to know, and I feel like had I not done that, I would not have had that sort of moment with the church to kind of let them know I'm doing this intentionally and I want you to feel uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's a good thing. Does that make sense? So anyway, I'm just curious. That's how I've used it. How have you used it, or in your context?
It sounds similar. I've found so I use ChatGPT on a regular basis, but I try to use it with some really firm guidelines for myself.
Sure.
And I try to use it as an evaluative tool and not an iterative tool. So I use it to evaluate what I create and give me feedback, not as a means of bypassing the creative process for myself. And so, because that's the thing I always want to be cautious of, and I cautious other creatives and communicators, is, AI is an increasingly effective evaluative tool, but it's also an increasingly effective creative tool. And you can step into some unfaithfulness as a pastor when you hand off your creative process, that the people are rightly assuming that you are, and I'm going to say creative process, I mean working with the text, working with the word, wrestling with who your people are and how they need to receive the truth of that word on any given week. When you hand that off to anybody else without citation, right? Mm-hmm. And especially when you hand it off to a machine, and let people just assume that you did that work, that is wrong. That's sinful. That's unfaithful. So I try to stay really hard in the lane of, I want to be evaluative with the ChatGPT AI tool, and not iterative. And so I'll take I do something very similar. I'll take my manuscript through and be like, hey, Chat, tell me what you heard in this, right? Or now over the course of a couple of years, I've uploaded, a few hundred sermons. You kind of know my voice. Is there anything in the sermon that you feel like is out of step with how I typically communicate? Or have I used this illustration before, right?
Right.
It's really good at, you can like build a little memory in there, and you can say, how many times before have I told this story? And then be like, you told this story last year. Oh, I forgot about that. Thanks for letting me know, right? So it's really helpful for those kind of things.
Yeah, that's good, man. I think that's really great. Thanks for going on that little thread with me for a while. I think that's going to help a lot of preachers out there and to kind of understand, the dynamics of preaching in this new day that we live in. So appreciate you doing that. But yeah, I want to talk to you. You and I have both put out recent videos regarding our synod's latest policy requirements for the SMP program. Specifically, its new age requirement of got to be 40 or more to get in. Of course, there's an asterisk next to it that says maybe some exceptions can be made. But let's take a step back and explain first what the SMP program is, and then how you or your church have kind of utilized it up to this point.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, the SMP program stands for Specific Ministry Pastor. And in its initiation, I think it was a Synod resolution in 2007 that started the SMP program, it was designed for a way for ministries that otherwise didn't have access to an ordained leader to lead Word and Sacrament ministry to get an ordained leader, to get a pastor. And so it allowed congregations to identify a qualified man in their ministry setting and put them through a process of training through one of our seminaries whereby they could be trained and then called to be a pastor in that specific setting. But in 2007, that resolution also stated that SMP pastors could be utilized as staff pastors and as mission planters. And that's primarily the way that I have experience with the SMP program. So right now, I serve a church where we have an associate pastor who is an SMP pastor. So he was originally on the staff of his calling congregation as a pastor, not as a pastor. I'm sorry, as a leader in another capacity. Showed the gifts for pastoral ministry, had a heart for pastoral ministry, and that congregation had a need for an additional pastor that fit his gift mix. And so he went into the SMP program, got ordained, and has since been called to our congregation. But he's an SMP pastor and an excellent one, an excellent pastor. I also, when I was in New York City, I was a church planter in New York City for 6 years. And we replanted one congregation in Rego Park, Queens, and we planted another congregation in Midtown Manhattan. And the plan there was for me to take a more apostolic approach to those ministries in replanting and then planting another congregation, meaning that I would get it started, but then we'd have to find other pastors to pastor those locations. I didn't want to just build a system that was banking on me to lead it all. And so we utilized SMP to ordain a young man who was part of the congregation in Queens that we were replanting. He was a New York City public school teacher at the time, but he was born and raised in that church. And we had made him an elder, given him some responsibilities. He clearly showed the gifts for pastoral ministry and a calling for it. And so we put him in SMP, and then we ordained him and made him the site pastor of that church in Queens that he grew up in. And he's the pastor there to this day and doing an incredible job, super faithful. And and then I've supervised other SMPs who have planted other churches and done some excellent things. But my personal experience with it as this alternate route to ordination and pastoral formation is in the staff pastor and the church planter context.
That's good. Yeah, and there's different contexts that have come out of it, and those are definitely two of the uses that have come from it. So, you put a video out, kind of, time to say the quiet part out loud. And so tell me why you decided to put a video out regarding SMP and specifically the new policies that have come out.
Yeah. Well, I felt I needed to say something because I firmly believe, as you do, and you've been early out of the gate on this, as folks like Tim Allman, that in our current moment, more conversation is better. That for whatever reason, there has been a feeling that pastors who disagree with some of the decisions made by our synodical leadership can't speak up too loudly, lest they get in trouble in some way, shape, or form. And that trouble can manifest itself in a number of different ways, from kind of a general scolding from your district president saying, hey, don't cause any trouble, to no longer being allowed to serve the church at a synodical level. Despite being synodically trained, you can suddenly find yourself not synodically trusted if you speak up in some capacity against what our leadership is doing. And that's a fact. That happens. That's happened to me. And so I think in that kind of a setting, continuing to say nothing, silence only enables the dysfunction. And so when I saw the decision made by a handful of people at the synodical level to radically change what the SMP program was about and who could be in it, I thought to myself, man, if I stay quiet, I'm just enabling the problem. I have to speak up. More people have to speak up and say, I do not believe that this decision serves our church body well. And in fact, I think a number of decisions aren't serving our church body well. And the synod structure exists to serve the local church, period. It exists to uphold and encourage and equip its called workers and the mission of the local church. And its oversight of pastoral formation and ordination is on loan to it from the local church. Ordination and pastoral formation belong to local churches. It's entrusted to bishops, overseers, a synodical or denominational hierarchy for the sake of maintaining good order and effectiveness and efficiency. But if that trust is broken, it's incumbent upon the local churches to whom ordination belongs to say something and go, these decisions regarding your stewardship of pastoral formation and ordination don't work for us. And I have felt that I have been too quiet on that front, and that a lot of people have been too quiet on that front, and that we need to say something. When a decision is made, especially regarding pastoral formation, that many of us believe doesn't work for the local church or the mission realities on the ground, we have to say something. And so I just felt compelled to add my voice into the mix, all the while admitting that my opinions are opinions, and that I hold those things loosely, and that I'm open to being convinced that the motivations of our leadership maybe aren't as negative as I'm being led to assume, and that the situation of our need for pastors maybe isn't as dire as I and others think it is. I'm open to having my mind changed. I'm going to be humble and hold those things loosely, but I just felt compelled to say something.
That's good. And yeah, I want to kind of say the same thing from my side. Like, I am one voice that has, yes, strong opinions, but I want to think the best and not the worst. But I think that's one of the things kind of that silence breeds, and we get this, nicely polished 5-page document that has a lot of questions behind it, and there's been nothing publicly released on the data, the transparency, all these things. And so I think, to your point, Matt, when we're not talking, when there's silence on either side, it is easy to assume things. And I think you and I are saying we don't want to assume things. We want to talk. We want to know more, and we also want to share our opinion of how this particular decision negatively impacts our church.
Yeah.
So,
and what I would add, Zach, is you have to assume things. You must assume things.
Mm-hmm.
And that, with public trust comes public accountability. And our synodical leaders have been given a public trust. They're elected officials. They're politicians. And I know that a lot of them have Rev in front of their name and refer to themselves as pastors. But in the end, it's a bureaucratic institution. They're political leaders. They've been given a public trust. And with public trust comes public accountability. And part of public accountability means saying, I'm questioning your motives. I am questioning your motives. I'm assuming this. In the absence of a logical explanation for this decision, In the absence of conversation around this decision, I am going to assume this, this, and this about your motives, and it's incumbent upon you as my elected leader to tell me otherwise and prove me wrong. And so I take issue with those who say, Matt, in your video, you shouldn't have ascribed certain motivations to leaders. In the absence of them explaining themselves, I have no choice. I have no choice. And public accountability is part of a public trust. You can't make people feel bad you should not rather make people feel bad or as though they're breaking the 8th commandment for asking elected officials to explain themselves. That's part of the deal. That's part of the deal. And building up a system or a mythos that says, well, we can't ascribe anything remotely negative to their motivations. That's breaking the 8th commandment. No. I would argue that keeping quiet is breaking the 8th commandment. So I think we have to do this as part of faithfulness as the ones who are at local churches to whom pastoral formation and ordination belongs.
That's good. And I do think we're also, yes, public accountability for public positions, but we're also happy to talk privately, to talk one-on-one, and those invitations from my end have been sent out. And I think without conversation, we're just left to assume a lot about one another. And I would say there's been some assumptions placed on particularly large churches and the pastors. I've heard the word thrown out a lot of we've abused the program, not used it for what it was for. And I'm looking into the original documents, man, and it looks like we're using it for exactly what it said it was supposed to be for. And so, again, my point in all that is let's keep talking. We need public and private conversations.
Absolutely.
But here's what you said. You said it's time to say the quiet part out loud. Our leadership does not want more pastors. They want to preserve a particular model of pastoral ministry and to maintain that power over that very narrow model. So my question for you, it's been a couple weeks since you put it out. Have you heard anything since you've said this that would make you take back that statement, roll it back a little, or say it any differently? Or what is the evidence for why you would say something like that?
There's been some really great dialogue about it, which is what I wanted to encourage. And I've been able to engage in a bunch of that. And it's been great. It's been really helpful. It's been eye-opening for me and for others.
Yeah.
There's been kind of the typical extremely negative pushback, but I just kind of put that.
Yeah, I feel like I got a good bit of that. Having said that, mine was very raw, reactionary. Yours was very polished, and you used anyway a lot of good tact. But go ahead.
I think I have not heard in the back and forth in the dialogue that's happened in between. I've not heard anything that would change my mind about the fact that I believe that our church body does not want more pastors in general, that they instead want more pastors of a very specific, narrow type. And part of the reason they want that is because they have made some of the decisions that they made is because they want to maintain control over pastoral formation rather than lean on and trusting local congregations to have a hand in pastoral formation and ordination. Nothing I've heard has changed my mind that I believe that's the motivation, that's what's going on. I wouldn't change anything I've said. I don't regret anything that I've said. But I also stand by my commitment to hold the things I've said loosely and humbly and to allow my mind to be changed. But quite frankly, for example, you had an excellent interview with Tim Wood of Ad Crucem the other day. Excellent interview. Tim said the quiet part out loud too. Tim and I, and Tim, you and Tim don't see eye to eye on this. We're on kind of opposite sides of what we think the problem is and what the solutions are. But if I heard his response to some of your questions correctly, Tim said that we should have fewer pastors. Not only that we should tighten the pathways to ordination, but we should probably cull the roles of the pastors that we have because we have a bunch of ineffective pastors who couldn't pass a Greek and Hebrew qualifier anymore. And if anything, he believes that we should make the current pool smaller. That to me says, and if he's representative of any capacity of kind of the other philosophy at work here and the synodical philosophy at work here, because he does sit on a couple important synodical level kind of boards, that affirms my assumptions that we actually have leadership that thinks we should have fewer pastors, and that the pastors we have are inept. So we need to tighten the reins over the formation process, not loosen it, so that we can cure the ills of the poor formation that's happening, and we can have higher control and command over the pastors that are being formed. So like that conversation for me only confirmed what I'm assuming.
Yeah. And yeah, with Tim, I'm super grateful. He's been one of the few voices that likely we do land in different places. Not a lot theologically, but practically. I think that's, again, most of our differences in our synod. Amen. We agree on far more than we disagree. Most of the disagreements is on practical stuff. Yep. And so I praised him for coming on and having hard conversations. And to his credit, he said we need to have more of these conversations and be talking with one another. But yeah, I heard the same thing, and with maybe different reasonings than you and I would give. And it does feel like, there's a significant push to, it feels weird to say that they don't want more pastors, but and so I can feel that, but it's also very much like they do. They want a pastor of a certain type that I'm feeling. And, I've gone on record to say that many times, and I feel like all of us have to say this every time, I'm not against residential seminary.
Not at all.
But when I asked a survey of 1,054 leaders, and they're saying in large portion, many of these are from our larger and growing congregations, that we're not confident that we're going to get a pastor that will fit the needs of our church. We can both have questions about the effectiveness and want the program itself to get better, and speak and ask questions without being against it. And I think that's the struggle, is people are... what have you learned kind of in the process of just asking hard questions, and how people are handling that? Has that been easy for you to kind of see the comments, or what have you learned with that? Where are we at with kind of just handling difficult stuff like this?
Well, there's kind of the typical kind of immature responses that happen, in different camps. You have the extremes on either side that respond in really immature and unhelpful ways. But the vast majority of conversation, dialogue, even and especially with those that don't see eye to eye with some of my opinions and assumptions, has been respectful. It's been helpful. You can scroll the comment section of various platforms, and you'll see me just celebrating the fact that, man, that this guy who does not agree with me made a great point, or I've never thought of this. I'll concede that. There's been a lot of really ultimately helpful conversation. Now, will the unhealthy family, that is the LCMS, will it somehow later down the road kind of rear its ugly head and stifle and punish dissenters? Perhaps. But quite frankly, I'm also at a point where if and when that happens, I'll let the world know. I don't particularly care anymore. And I think we need more people who it's like a family system, right? When there's a family system where there's maybe some addiction that's run rampant, maybe there's there's an alcoholic, there's a narcissist on the loose. The whole system is perfectly designed to support the narcissism and the addiction. And it takes somebody in that family system saying, this doesn't work for me anymore. And that person at first is going to be labeled as problematic, as unloving, as uncaring. But it takes those people to step forward and say, this system is broken, doesn't work for me, and I'm not going to play my part that enables the status quo, period. And so that's what people who are speaking up about some of the decisions of our leadership are trying to do. And you have to take with that some of the pushback that's going to naturally come from the sick system that says, no, we may live in hell, but we know the names of all the streets. Let's stay the same. You're going to have to take the pushback from that, endure that, if there's going to be any hope, not just a wish, but a hope that things will get better.
That's good. So for you, obviously, again, there were several policies. The one that I think is standing out the most is the limiting of the age to a maximum, or a minimum, I should say, of 40. And so what are some of the reasons that you personally are against that becoming a new policy?
Well, I'm against it becoming a new policy because it obviously severely limits the number of men who are going to be qualified to enter the SMP program. And there are men under the age of 40 in local congregations who fit the biblical standard for elder pastoral leadership according to the New Testament. And they feel a sense of calling. That calling's been confirmed by their congregation, who has said, yeah, you really should be a pastor. But who cannot uproot their whole life and move to St. Louis or move to Fort Wayne. And that doesn't make them bad for not being able to do that. And so I think this is really unfortunate, because not only does it narrow the number of candidates for pastoral ministry, but it also sends a terrible message to those who aren't able to take the traditional route. It communicates to them that this is not only an alternate path, whether if you fit the mold and you're 40 plus, it's not just an alternate path to ordination. It is a subpath, a subclass of ordination, because people who are truly committed to the pastoral office, they will uproot their family, they will move to another city, they'll stay there, and then they'll move to another city, and then they'll move back, and then they'll take a call and move somewhere else. And that's and all of a sudden, we've become charismatics, where we say, that's how we test the fruit of somebody's call, their willingness to do this.
Yeah.
We look for these like subjective personal signs of piety to prove their fitness for the call. Will you uproot your family and move 3 times? Well, sometimes the answer to that's going to be no. Nobody here is saying that we want less formation for pastors. No one here is saying that we want a less rigorous formation for pastors. Sometimes a local church needs to make pastors from within. And that's been the New Testament model, the biblical model. And so what I'm saying is that we have to have a means for localized seminary formation, placement, ordination. That's what we need. And no one's saying that we should lower the standards. We're just saying it should be able to happen locally.
Yeah. And, Matt, you've made costly sacrifices for ministry. And I've found that argument, it seems to pop up quite a bit in at least the video that I made on the SMP stuff about sacrifice, that, if someone's not willing to sacrifice and do this, then maybe they're not cut out for ministry. I've found that to be really harmful, and I don't really understand it. It's almost like not just, is it an outward action, but it's almost like because I did that sacrifice once, like I'm good forever. And I'm like, I don't know, like that feels weird to me. I think priesthood of all believers, we're all supposed to be sacrificing in all of our lives. And I've also seen SMP, it's not, it's bivocational. So there's incredible sacrifice happening on the family side and on the other side. So speak to that, maybe a little bit more of the sacrifice, and if that's helpful, harmful, biblical, cultural. What's up with that? I'm struggling with that one.
Well, I think it's harmful, and I think it's demeaning. Is it beautiful when someone takes the traditional residential route and embraces a whole lot of discomfort to do that? Of course it's beautiful. Is it required? No, it shouldn't be required. It shouldn't be required. It shouldn't be a litmus test for your fidelity to the call. It shouldn't. And so I just think when we say, well, if a pastor's not willing to move to St. Louis or Fort Wayne, maybe they're not up for the larger sacrifice that is pastoral ministry. I just don't buy that. Again, I just look at the history of formation and ordination in the Christian church, and for example, when in the New Testament, when you see Paul living the apostolic life, moving around, raising up local leaders, he did not require them to move to Jerusalem for 3 years. If that were truly like the ideal path for formation, like maybe that would have been required. But instead, he uprooted his life as the apostolic leader, and he stayed there for years, say, for example, in Ephesus, for years upon years, and he formed, he taught. And I'm sure there was sacrifice involved in that formation. There's always sacrifice involved in taking up the call to pastoral ministry. In many and various ways, but he bore the brunt of that, and he raised up, ordained, and placed local leaders in those churches. And again, I just think there needs to be a means for that. I think it's demeaning. Quite honestly, what I think it's jealousy. I think you've got guys who went through the traditional route, and it isn't easy. It is hard. It is life-changing. It's a pivot point in your life. When you uproot everything, go to St. Louis, stay there for a couple of years, go to a vicarage congregation, move back to St. Louis, then move somewhere else. Like, it's disruptive. It's difficult. It is a sacrifice. And I think, quite frankly, you just got a lot of guys who are like, well, if I had to do it, then they have to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Period. Let's not spiritualize it. Let's just call it what it is. Well, if I had to, you have to. Period. Which is not a great reason to make that a critical part of our model.
Yeah.
But get over it. Some guys, but I'm with you. The guys who are in programs like SMP and CMC, they have tremendous amount of sacrifices already. So we have a CMC vicar here at my church.
Explain what that is. People aren't as familiar with that.
Yeah, it's a program. It's another alternate route to ordination out of Concordia University in Irvine. It takes place over multiple years. It's longer than the residential seminary program. But involves, of course, classwork, but then basically a years upon years long vicarage at your calling and ordaining congregation. And so we have a student who's a part of who's part of the CMC program. He's a vicar, and he has been now for 3 years with us, and he is actively working to plant a congregation among immigrants from India here in Houston. And he's doing an incredible job. But while he's doing that, while he's going to school, albeit in a modular program through CMC, he is working a full-time job as an engineer. He's got 3 young kids, and his plate is more full than any other pastor I've ever met. And yet, this man is embracing that difficulty, that extra responsibility of planting a church, going to school and being a vicar, having a full-time job, raising a family, embracing that difficulty, indulging a lot of sacrifice with tremendous joy. And I would pit his commitment to the call up against anybody else's who went the traditional route. This guy has had to endure more and far worse in order to be a pastor in the end than I did, and than anyone that I went to school in St. Louis with. And that story has been replicated over and over and over and over again, not just in the CMC program, but in the SMP program. Yeah.
What's CMC stand for? Do you remember? We have so many acronyms.
We do have so many acronyms. I quite honestly don't recall the actual.
That's all right. Yeah, don't worry about it.
Acronym.
Christian McCaffrey from the San Francisco 49ers, I think, is CMC.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
That's good, and I think there's a level of pride to it as well that hits in that we have to be really careful of. We have these titles, and we've made these sacrifices, and if you make any less sacrifice in their eyes or don't have this title, it's like, man, we need to get back to the priesthood of all believers and recognize that being a pastor is certainly a special call and a privilege, but so also are all the vocations. That's one of the greatest theologies we have in Lutheranism, is the theology of vocation. And I think we're minimizing the other aspects of all the different vocations that come from it. And so here's one other amazing line from your video that I hadn't put much thought into. Here's what you said. There's a circular logic at play among those who firmly resist localized pastoral formation. The argument goes like this: we can't do it because there isn't enough unity in worship and liturgical practice in our church body. And the fear is that forming pastors locally amongst our already fragmented landscape will only increase the fragmentation, especially in worship practice. And yet, the solution that they offer is to double down on the one system that hasn't produced the uniformity they are insisting on: traditional residential seminary formation. The very approach they failed to unify us is now being presented as the only way to prevent further disunity. So, along those lines, to clear the air for those who hear this episode, I know I've already said it, but are you against residential seminary or simply advocating that it cannot be the only pathway?
I am not at all against residential seminary. I think it should be championed as an ideal path to ordination, but it shouldn't be held as an only path or as an ultimate ideal, if that makes sense, like to the detriment of other paths. Like, we would love for you to come to St. Louis or Fort Wayne, be residential. We think there's a lot of advantages to that. If there's any way you can do that, please do, but there are other legitimate paths to ordination, right? So not at all against residential seminary formation. But I also want to make clear that the SMP program, while not residential, is seminary formation. That kind of gets lost in some of this conversation. Students who are taking the SMP courses are taking courses at the seminary, and they're taking online courses from seminary professors. At the current moment, apart from the languages, they're taking the same classes that residential students are taking. So part of what we're arguing about here is just location.
Yeah.
I mean, if I've got
or the mode of it, yeah.
Yeah, but if I've got largely the same professors taking the same class load, it's a seminary education, and it takes place over a longer stretch of time. And so no one is advocating for contra seminary education. It's about the hyper preference to the residential model. By the way, I just remembered what CMC stands for. It stands for the Cross Cultural Ministry Center. So
that's right. There it is. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I agree. Like, there's some real benefits. And so it maybe is an ideal pathway, but also I want to put it out there, it's not perfect. And if a large number of church leaders and pastors that are in your institution that you're serving are saying we're not confident, it also needs to be looked at as how can we make this ideal pathway even greater? And that's one of the major issues I have overall, is just this stance of this is what it is, and it is the gold standard, and it is perfect as it is, and it needs not changing. And nobody's kind of come out right and said it that way, but it sure feels like that. And so, let's talk personal then, like what, or go ahead, you're going to say something?
Well, I was just going to that statement I made in the video about the kind of the circular logic.
Yeah.
You saw it again, and again, I give Tim credit for coming on your podcast. I think he's a fantastic advocate for his position, and speaks with great wisdom. And I think he's got the right attitude and approach to this. He's willing to have these conversations, and I'm so glad he's a lay leader in our church body. I would love to have him in my church. He's awesome. But you saw that same circular logic at work in his interview with you, where he said very plainly, we need to take a strong look at the 5,000 or so pastors that we have who haven't been able to rightly manage the churches that we have. We have a seminary. These are his words. We have seminaries who have produced pastors that have poorly stewarded the churches they've been sent to the point where we're in this dramatic decline. We should take a hard look at that. But then at the same time, he said, I'm not only in favor of a 40-year-old age limit for SMP, I think we should get rid of SMP and this alternative route to formation altogether, which means we have to lean even harder on residential seminary. The same seminaries that he has said have led to the formation of pastors who have failed in not only retaining the church, but growing the church. So that to me is just so confusing. Like if in the end the formation isn't done right, whether it's through SMP or it's through traditional residential seminary, then change the formation, change the training. And I know some would say, well, we are. I haven't seen, other than making worship practices more conservative, and some other kind of like surface level, I would argue some ideophora kind of things. I don't see where the formation process in Fort Wayne or St. Louis is changing substantially enough to move the needle in terms of different outcomes in the local churches that they're sent to. Like, tell me what you're doing differently to train pastors in how to manage a congregation, in how to lead people, while you're also trying to love and serve people. Tell me what you're doing to change the formation versus simply tightening the reins within the seminaries on how they're taught to lead worship, on what they're taught as the primary tasks day to day of the pastor are, seeing pastors almost exclusively as shepherds who offer care to shut-ins and not people who also manage a small business. Tell me how you're changing that. And I haven't seen that. So there is a circular logic at play that says, the seminaries aren't cutting the mustard, but we need more guys to go to the seminary, and the seminary is the ideal route. That doesn't work for me. Doesn't work.
Yeah. And again, we're left to assume kind of what you said in that circular logic, that they are wanting to continue this because it can be controlled as best they can control it, and it can produce a type of pastor, one type of pastor that works in one type of congregation, and that's the challenge. Is we've got so many different congregations, so many different contexts. We're all wired differently. We all have different personalities, even though we're in a similar office. And so there's just not much willingness to really think creatively about how we do pastoral formation. Like you, I just see a tightening of the reins in a time when collectively what we're doing is not working.
Yeah.
And so and I think that's why, that's why Tim, when I kind of felt like you, not just with the SMP video, but the moment I wanted to speak up, that I really felt like I can't stay quiet any longer, was the moment that Allman, who I feel like's trying some things, was told to be silent on his views on pastoral formation. And I'm like, man, silence has never been the answer, especially when we need to innovate and think about stuff differently. And that for me was like, Tim's a great friend of mine, and I'm like, what have I been doing being silent? I love to focus, of course, on unifying things and getting people into the words of Jesus. Like, that's my favorite thing to do. But at the same time, like, I'm in a church body where we are struggling right now. And if my voice can be helpful, then Lord, let it be. And let me continue, like you, to hold things loosely and be open and humble. And I know I need all those things. And so, so let's go to your specific ministry. I'd love to know, will this change the way you do ministry presently or in the future, this new restriction?
I mean, it very well could. So we're looking right now at merging with another congregation here in the city, a congregation that's struggling, that perhaps very soon will not be able to afford to pay their pastor. And so we're doing what Tim and others have talked about, which is looking at consolidations and mergers. And I do think that's a key part of the path forward. We either live together, die alone as local churches here in the LCMS. So we're looking at a merger. But quite frankly, I think the best possibility for a future pastor for that, what would become a site of our church, or a campus, or a church, or a sister church, and like a network church, is going to be raised up from within, and is going to be an SMP pastor, someone who has an entrepreneurial, evangelistic, missional bent that is best suited for restarting that church, someone who is maybe a native to Houston in the unique context here, someone who is maybe grown up in that congregation that we've merged with and knows it really, really, really well. That if I can find that person to train, form, and ordain and install as the pastor of that location of this church, tell me why that's not better than getting a guy, than leaning on the promise that I'll be able to get somebody from the field where the field doesn't have church planting or church revitalization training at all, and the field can't guarantee me anybody who understands the unique soil that is Southeast Texas, and a dying, failing congregation, right? Mm-hmm. Tell me why that SMP pursuing an SMP pastor is not ideal for that.
Yeah.
So
added onto that too, a growing with the SMP, you're seeing it, a growing sentiment that they're going to be filling churches where word and sacrament ministry, where there is no pastor. And so if that person is connected to your church at all, feels like to me it's kind of a good luck. You may have gotten one or two in the past, but you're not getting one in the future if you've already got a pastor of your church.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So now I'm looking at that going, well, an SMP pastor, if that's what the Lord wants here, I think is probably ideal. But now I've got to hope that guy is over 40 years old, and has the membership requirements of churches, I believe, also shifted and changes. So it meets these new policy standards. So the likelihood of us having that guy in our midst is smaller. But then also, and this is part of the quiet part, is I'm not so sure that even if I've got that guy who fits that standard, if because we are looking at a more missional entrepreneurial context and we happen to be a more modern expression of the Lutheran faith in our church body in terms of how we do worship and things, I'm not sure that they're going to let him in, quite frankly, even if he meets those policy guidelines. Mm-hmm. Because I think I think this is not, how should I say this? I don't think that this conflict about SMP is theological or cultural. I think it's political. And so, because this is a political tool. So I'm not confident that even if I do have that SMP guy, that he's going to get approved for the program, because it doesn't work politically in the favor of those who are in power to let a church like mine replicate leaders.
Yeah. And what I would say is I love your vision. It's beautiful. It's what we did at King of Kings last year. We merged with a church that was struggling, and by the grace of God, we got an SMP student in one cohort early enough. Yeah. He's 33 and he's doing a fabulous job. Just finished his first class. I serve as his mentor. And we've seen God do incredible things with that new campus that was dying. It was dead. And yet now it is alive again. They had 53 kids in their kids program like 2 weeks ago. A year ago, they had one. It's like, wow. And these are the things, like, so that's part of it. It's like, how will this impact your ministry? It may or may not today, but it also, like, it will prevent things like that from happening. 100% it will. And so it's really challenging, because I'll ask you, what would you say to a young man that feels called to ministry right now that's, 29 years old, and loves your church? So what do you say to him? That feels called to ministry, right?
Look, I would say this, and maybe I shouldn't say this on a podcast, but
I can edit it out later if you want. You just tell me after the fact.
What I'd say is this: let's discern whether or not you should do the traditional route, uproot your life, go to St. Louis, go to Fort Wayne, and then give yourself over to the NBA draft, the field of assignment, right? And maybe that's what the Lord's calling you to, right? To make yourself available as a pastor to the larger LCMS context, not to this one necessarily. Maybe that's the answer. Let's wrestle with that. And if that's where you land, I'm going to support you in that. But also, let's wrestle with whether or not you really are just called to lead in pastoral ways in this ministry. And if there's not a way to get you to a place of ordination and placement in this ministry as a pastor, we will find ways for you to lead in pastoral adjacent capacity, maybe as a really high functioning elder in this church, under the authority and oversight and guidance of the men who are part of the pastoral office in this church. We'll give you as much opportunity as we possibly can to use pastoral gifting and to assist the pastoral office in trying to live out this calling here. Now that's going to be limited. There's going to be certain things you can't do, right? But we're going to try and find as much that you can do within the pastoral office as a high functioning elder assistant to the pastors here to live this out. And we're going to lean heavy on some of the freedom we have as local congregations to do that. And look, and again, this part might get me in trouble. Okay, so if push comes to shove, and down the road, we feel as though our synod is completely they are no longer being faithful in stewarding formation and ordination, then we will consider doing that at the local level. Mm-hmm. Because we have confessional grounds to stand on to do that. And I would just point everyone to Article 10 of the Small Called Articles, which is of the ordination and the call, where and this is kind of considered Luther's last will and testament, right, theologically, where he added some clarity to some things in the Augsburg Confession. Listen to this. If the bishops would be true bishops, if the overseers in the Roman Catholic Church would be true overseers and would devote themselves to the church and the gospel, it might be granted to them for the sake of love and unity, but not from necessity, to ordain and confirm us and our preachers. If they're being right stewards, it might be good for us to say, hey, you guys be in charge of ordination and confirmation for pastoral ministry for the sake of love and unity, not out of biblical necessity, Luther says, all right? But because they neither are nor wish to be true bishops, they're not rightly stewarding their office, but worldly lords and princes who will neither preach nor teach nor baptize nor administer the Lord's Supper nor perform any work or office of the church, meaning they're not pastors in the church, and moreover persecute and condemn those who discharge these functions, having been called to do so, the church ought not on their account to remain without ministers. We should not wait for a broken system to provide us with pastors. And instead, as the ancient examples of the church and the fathers teach us, we ourselves will and ought to ordain suitable persons to this office. And even according to their own laws, they have not the right to forbid or prevent us. It may get to that point again. Mm-hmm. And to say that is not unfaithful. It's not a threat. I would say it is confessional.
It sounds confessional, yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. And for those that may be listening, I know we have listeners that are outside the LCMS that are like, what's all this about? The reason ordination is so important for our church is because we want to rightly administer these two words, word and sacrament. Word, of course, being God's word, his Bible, and the sacraments, which for us are baptism and communion. And we want to do that in an orderly way. And in our church body, we believe that the ones that do that in an orderly way are those who are ordained ministers. Doesn't mean that it can't happen outside of that, in emergency and in certain cases. But in our synod is becoming even more rigid and or bold about that. And so on one level, like they want to say you need to be ordained to do word and sacrament ministry, but we're struggling to find people to ordain when the pathways are getting cut out from underneath us. And so these are the challenging questions that I think are going to come unless there's some sort of resolution. And so I appreciate you willing to go down that road because it's challenging. Like this is what the Synod is forcing us into. When we have 29-year-olds that care about and want to get into ministry, that want to serve at our local context, we don't have good answers anymore. Right. And my fear is that either ministries won't happen or they will happen without us playing by the so-called rules, or that person will take their ball and go somewhere else to a pathway. I think a lot of the people that we're talking about actually don't care as much about being ordained and titles and certificates and degrees. They just want to be a pastor. And at the end of it, ordination is really important for our church body, but it's hard when we are limiting these things. And so for anyone outside, that might be helpful context. Yeah. But what, kind of wrapping up a little bit here, but what would you say to churches and church leaders? You're one of them, I'm one of them. When the synodical handbook and the institution fails to support us in our local context, what do we do? What can we do?
I think we're doing it right now. I think we have to say such, like out loud and in the public sphere. We have to go on our podcast, go to our circuit meetings, Go to your Winkle, whatever you call it in your area, that local gathering of pastors, and talk about it and ask the question: are the decisions that are being made serving us well? Is the policy that's in place, is it right for us? Is it a fit for us? And don't disengage and merely disparage the system. Engage rather, and be a part of the system. Are there motions that need to come to the floor of an upcoming synodical convention that can right some of this stuff, that can force the system to work better for the needs of the local church on the ground? You gotta collaborate and put some of those things forward. And so I think the number one thing that you can do when the system's not working for you is, number one, you have to say, the system's not working for me. And then you have to collaborate with other people who feel the same way to say, what can we do within, while showing love and respect to the powers that be and the people around us, what can we do to force some change within this system?
That's good.
What can we do to do that? And so you just, you gotta engage and be a part of the process, and that's what I've felt convicted that I've been too disengaged, and that my silence has only enabled some of the dysfunction. And I would just encourage other local church leaders to engage as well, and just ask the question: is what's happening working for us? And again, I'm not saying that there's some things like that people on the other side of this debate have said that I agree with. I do think we have churches that need to close and that need to consolidate. I do think we have some pastors who are profoundly ineffective. I do think that the answer to some of the issues is not less pastors. It is more and better trained pastors. But the only way we're going to get more pastors is with more pathways, and the only way we're going to get better pastors is with each of those pathways being robust, thorough, and replete with deep theological training, and very efficient oversight.
That's good.
I'm not against that at all.
Yeah, and we can keep talking about localized, affordable, regional, all sorts of other ways, online, not online. I think we got to keep doing that. And one of the things we didn't talk about that I wish we had a little bit more time for is, all this is just to sort of preserve what we already have.
Yeah.
And I think both of us are more forward thinking, and you're a church planter. I've planted a church. Like we want to do new ministries, and sometimes, what I find challenging in all these conversations is we do need to be healthier. But all of this conversation is, is it taking us away from, sadly, what we ought to be putting more time and attention and effort into, which is new ministries and reaching new people with the gospel, and really championing what Luther proclaimed from the beginning, that the gospel must go forth. It must be proclaimed.
That's right.
Anyway. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
Just quickly, I know we're out of time, but on that note, I would argue, albeit subjectively, that locally trained and ordained leaders are some of the most effective missionaries, evangelists, and church planters that we could possibly have to that local context, because they're from it, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we need, at the very least, we should embrace alternate paths to ordination like SMP that are local and contextual as a primary means for raising up church planters. Mm-hmm. Because they are, I've found they're the most effective. They're the most effective.
Yeah.
Anyway,
that's good. All right, I got to ask you, Wheel of Fortune, my man. You were on Wheel of Fortune. What in the world? That was so fun. I think I saw your Facebook post or something, and it was like, Matt Popovits. If I had to predict one pastor that I thought would have shown up on Wheel of Fortune, my prediction would have been Matt Popovits. And there you were, and you crushed it, man. You won. There's your little name tag. Tell me a cool story. That's sweet. Cool story or two that came from that chapter of your life.
Yeah. So that was just maybe 6 months ago, and I never had plans to be on a game show, but I've always watched Wheel of Fortune and been a fan of the show. But I started really watching it about 1.5 years ago with my son, who was diagnosed with some pretty severe dyslexia. And so we started sitting down and watching it together as a way to try and help him with reading comprehension. and spelling, those kind of things. And so as we're sitting down, a year and a half ago, watching this show, he's like getting sick and tired of me solving the puzzle first. He's like, I thought we were watching this for me.
Yeah.
So my son started to say, Dad, you should try out. And I was like, I'm not going to try out. And so finally, to get him off my back, I said, well, I'll do it if you help me. And so he made a video for me, and he helped fill out the audition form. And then like 2 weeks later, they called me and they're like, hey, let's do an in-person audition, or rather a Zoom audition. And so I just did that process. And within a month, I was in California on the set of Wheel of Fortune with Ryan Seacrest and playing the game. And then we ended up winning the whole show. Like, I won the bonus round and everything. But the coolest thing about it was I just did it as a way to make a memory with my family. Yeah. And we got to all go together. They all got to be on the show with me. And we got to have this incredible, silly adventure together. Yeah. And I got to, afterwards, we were at the airport leaving, the next morning, coming back to Texas. And I was able to look at my kids and go, I think part of the lesson here is it's okay to take the silly side quest and put yourself out there, because you never know what's going to happen. Yeah. And we got to have a memory as a family that will last us a lifetime. It was the best experience for our family. And Ryan Seacrest is one of the nicest human beings in the world, as is Vanna White.
That's so sweet, bro. I love it. All right, we ask all our guests to challenge our listeners. If they can do one thing this week to be a greater disciple of Jesus, what would you challenge them to do?
I would challenge them to take an unreasonable interest in the well-being of somebody else. Somebody who's not necessarily their family member, but a particular challenge for the guys. I have benefited from older men in my life taking an unreasonable interest in my well-being and looking at me and saying, hey, how you doing? How you doing spiritually? How you doing as a man? How you doing in your vocation? How you doing? And being curious about me, offering resources and encouragement and wisdom to me. I'm a better man because men, other than my dad, and I have a great dad, have taken an unreasonable interest in my spiritual and personal well-being. And so I would encourage you to do the same. I mean, Jesus did that with his disciples, right? He's going out and grabbing these guys and taking this, like, why do you care about me, Rabbi? I'm the cast-off. I'm the one who couldn't cut it for rabbi school. And so I would just encourage you to do that. Look around the landscape of your life and say, Jesus, who can I take an unreasonable interest in their well-being? And then saddle up next to them, get curious, ask how they're doing, and then see what gifts, encouragement, wisdom you can offer to them to help move them forward and wherever God's called them.
I love it, bro. Hey, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you or any of the things that you're involved in?
Hey, great question. So you can find me on all the socials. Just look up Matt Popovits, Popovits. But I've got a ministry that I do alongside my pastoral ministry called Make It Simple. And you can go to makeitsimple.org. And what we offer there is there's a conference that we put on every couple of years called VoxCon that helps communicators. And then we've had some amazing people take part in that, like Donald Miller, Sally Lloyd-Jones, and Andrew Peterson, and others. And then there's a weekly newsletter that we put out that helps encourage people in the gospel and in the telling of Jesus' story. And there's some coaching we offer there as well. So just head over to makeitsimple.org.
Cool. I like simple. That works for me. So Thanks, bro. Appreciate you. And thanks for using your voice for positive change. And Lord, to you be the glory. Ultimately, we're grateful that he is seated on his throne today, and all this stuff is, he's not worried about any of this stuff. No, he's got the enemy defeated, and we're on the same team. And so appreciate you, Matt. Have a great week. Thanks, bro.
Hey, thanks, man. You too.
Well, thank you so much, Matt, for coming on and lending your voice to these important conversations. I do pray that in 2026, we can move these conversations forward. We can listen to one another, and to God be the glory in whatever comes of that. 2026 is going to be a great year for the podcast. We're going to have continuing weekly episodes, but also I want to let you know about something that we're launching in just a few days. Starting the first Sunday of the year, January 4th, we are launching on this channel, as well as Facebook and Instagram, 21 days of prayer for the LCMS. And what is 21 days of prayer for the LCMS? It's exactly that. We're going to be praying for the LCMS, 21 different things we're going to pray for. I've got 21 different voices, one for each day, 3-minute videos every day, just to kind of get us started and to really give the year over to the Lord. We have so many important conversations. It's a pivotal year for our church. It's a convention year for our church body. There's a lot of things that we need to make sure that as we're having these conversations, that we are putting them into the hands of the omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent one. And so that's exactly what we're doing starting January 4th. So how can you get involved? It's pretty simple. Follow us, subscribe on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and lend your voice. Each day we're going to be praying, like I said, for 21 different things for our LCMS. And I would love to know how we can pray for you. And so as we go through that, you'll be able to put comments. People will be able to pray for one another. My prayer is that it's a really unifying start to the year. So join in. It's going to be great. We'll see you in 2026.